We tend to assume that wealth, status, and privilege automatically buy loyalty, but history shows us that when a real crisis hits, the people with the most to lose are usually the first to run. Take 18th century Kerala, on the southwestern coast of India. Here, the Queen of Kaipuzha lived in absolute luxury. Her husband, the King of Ambalapuzha, gifted her the lush territory of Pulinkunnu, complete with sprawling estates, deep treasuries, and a massive retinue of servants. Her authority was backed by a rigid social structure. The region was dominated by over 300 wealthy elite Nair families. These aristocratic households essentially acted as her royal guard, enjoying immense financial benefits and privilege in exchange for their sworn fealty to the crown. On the extreme margins of that society were 4 or 5 destitute Nisrani, or Syrian Christian families. They owned no land, held no titles, and survived entirely on whatever physical day labor they could scrape together along the riverbanks. Pulinkunnu was a microcosm of deep inequality. That divide was held together by a single fragile assumption: the Queen's royal authority and her absolute trust that the elites would protect her at all costs. Then the neighboring kingdom of Travancore launched a massive military campaign. Their army was ruthless, highly organized, and rapidly swallowing up territories across the coast. By the time the news reached Pulinkunnu, the Ambalapuzha king's forces were already collapsing. The Travancore army was marching directly toward the queen's estate. If she stayed, she and her family would be captured by a hostile, authoritarian power intent on erasing her husband's dynasty. She had to act immediately. The queen devised a desperate evacuation plan: gather her young children, load the royal treasury, and escape by boat back to her ancestral homeland of Kaippuzha before the invaders arrived. To execute this, she sent her eldest son to summon the 300 elite families. She needed their boats, their manpower, and the physical protection they had sworn to provide. The stakes were absolute. If she couldn't secure an escort tonight, her bloodline and the entirety of her wealth would be wiped out by morning. As dusk settled over the riverbank, the queen and her remaining staff frantically loaded the royal vessels with old heirlooms and provisions. She sat in the boat with her young children, watching the tree line, waiting for her massive royal guard to materialize. Nobody came. Every single one of the 300 elite households barred their doors. Terrified that helping the queen escape would mark them for execution by the invading Travancore army, the elites hid inside their mansions and refused to answer her call. Within hours, even her own household servants slipped away into the night. The queen was left completely alone on the docks. Her young children began to cry from hunger as the sun disappeared and the enemy army marched closer. In a single night, the hierarchy of Pulinkunnu inverted. The families who owed their entire status to the queen's favor now saw that same connection as a liability they weren't willing to die for. Just as she realized she was completely defenseless, 4 figures walked past the docks in the dark. They were the Nasrani laborers, heading home from a brutal day of work. Desperate, the queen called out to them, begging for safe passage. They didn't hesitate. They told her that because they had eaten the salt of her land, they were bound by duty to serve her. To refuse her in her darkest hour, they said, would mean they were no longer human. They had only one condition. They asked for just a few moments to drink a mouthful of leftover rice water. They hadn't eaten all day and needed the sheer physical energy to row the heavy boats. The men quickly drank their meager rations, boarded the boats, and pushed the heavy vessels out into the current. As they rowed into the night, the betrayed queen looked back at the massive, silent mansions of the elites who had abandoned her. Weeping for her children and her lost kingdom, she delivered a devastating curse into the dark. She prayed that the cowardly aristocratic families would lose everything and perish in ruin, and that the loyal laborers would multiply and inherit total prosperity. According to local history, those spoken words sealed the future destiny of Pulinkunnu. The laborers rowed tirelessly through the night, safely delivering the queen and her children to Kaippuzha by dawn. True to her word, she fed them a massive feast and rewarded them with riches far beyond what they could have imagined. Shortly after, Travancore annexed Pulinkunnu, formally dissolving the Ambalapuzha kingdom and integrating the region into its own expanding borders. This chart shows what happened to the demographics of Pulinkunnu. The 300 elite Nair families experienced a total collapse, shrinking down to 4 destitute households. Meanwhile, the descendants of those 4 starving laborers simultaneously surged, expanding into a community of over 300 wealthy households. The modern presence of the Nazrani community in the region is undeniable. They grew to become the dominant, landowning, and prosperous merchant class today. The socio-economic positions of the 2 groups effectively inverted, mirroring the specific outcome described in the Queen's final words. So, did a magical, spoken curse actually destroy the elites of Pulinkunnu? Or is there a brutal historical mechanism driving this legend? When a conquering empire like Travancore takes over a territory, their first objective is always to neutralize the old power structures. They systematically stripped the former elite guards of their land, their military titles, and their wealth to ensure they could never fund a rebellion. By disenfranchising the old aristocrats, the new regime created a massive economic vacuum. Marginalized working-class groups, who posed no political threat to the new king, were positioned to step in, capitalize on new trade economies, and build their own wealth. The story of the Kaippuzha Queen's curse is a classic example of cultural memory. It acts as a mythological wrapper, encoding the very real, violent socio-political shift that erased one class to make room for another. Whether attributed to the supernatural power of a betrayed queen or the cold mechanics of geopolitics, the history of Pulinkunnu leaves a stark reality. Loyalty cannot be bought with privilege. It is proven only when the lights go out and everything is on the line.